Thanks everybody for joining today. It's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this to a joint presentation of the NYU Jordan Center for the Advanced Study of Russia, as well as the NYU Comparative Politics Seminar Series in the Politics Department. And as a professor in the Politics Department and director of the Jordan Center, it's an especially great pleasure to have this meeting today. Just a very quick note, so to folks who are here from the Jordan Center, this is these are weekly seminars that we have in the Politics Department, and there's a very different culture around the Politics Department talks than we have in the Jordan Center, which is that there are often interruptions of the speaker, not physically interrupting them in the middle of the thing, but questions are taken throughout the talk. So you'll see people raising their hands. And so I want to invite everybody in the audience if they want to ask questions as the talk is considering. And also just to be aware that if, as in the Jordan Center, if you're used to waiting to hold your question to the end, sometimes because there's lively discussion over the course of the talk, we don't have time for a sort of standard Q&A at the end of the talk. But otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Tara to welcome our speaker. But it's a great pleasure for me to see an old friend, Masha Petrova, here joining us today from her dacha outside of Moscow. So, but I'll turn it over to Tara for the official introductions and the logistics on the seminar.
Great, thank you all so much for coming. We're really excited to hear Maria present about social media and xenophobia, evidence from Russia. So as Josh said, you can feel free to use the sort of hand raising button to ask questions at any time throughout. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end. And if you have any issues or concerns finding the button, you can always send me a message through the chat function. All right, so we'll let Maria take it away. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, so thanks for inviting me. That's joint work with Leo Burstin, Georgy Yegorov, and Ruben Nikolopov. So the motivation for this paper comes from the fact that you probably observe yourself that xenophobia and some expressions of hate has increased in the recent years. So we see it in electoral outcomes, we see it everywhere. And there is another phenomenon which also happened in the last several years, which is the rise of social media. And what we aim to do in this paper is to try to understand whether these two things are actually related and whether social media has something to do with this increase in xenophobia. So what we do in this paper, we analyze the potential effect of the social media penetration in Russia using data on hate crimes and on ethnic attitudes. And Russia, in this center, I should not convince you that Russia is a great case to study this question, because we've seen a lot of xenophobia, especially in the recent years, and also a lot of usage of social media. So what we do, we first conduct a survey experiment in order to try to elicit, to understand the true xenophobic attitudes and also potential stigma of expressing these attitudes. And finally, we also study the impact of social media penetration on hate crime. And finally, we develop a model which is consistent with all these empirical findings. And as Josh and Tara said, if at any point you have any question, please feel free to interrupt me. I'll be happy to answer. Okay, so how at all social media can affect hate crime? Well, there could be several potential mechanisms. One is just coordination, which is social media can make coordination of these actions, of different offline actions, actually more easier. It can reduce the cost of coordination. We've seen it for the case of protests in our econometrica paper, but it could be particularly important for activities which are illegal or stigmatized, such as hate crime. Also, social media can affect people's opinions directly. As people who were previously tolerant, they can get exposure to xenophobic views they did not have exposure to before and become less tolerant. Or previously intolerant individuals, they can see a lot of echo chamber type of content, which is they can see that a lot of intolerant individuals around them. And finally, social media can reduce stigma of either expressing xenophobic opinions or committing hate crimes from observing this intolerance online. So just to preview our finding, we see some evidence for the first, for coordination. We also see some evidence for the second one, for persuasion channel, but we don't see any evidence for reduction of stigma. We actually see evidence of the opposite, but I will be more specific about that. Just like to overview some literature, I'll be quick in the interest of time. There is recent literature on social media, polarization, protests, and even hate crime. So what's our contribution here? First, we study the impact of social media on xenophobic attitudes more generally. Second, we look at the long-term impact of social media on hate crime. And we also offer a model that can explain all of the findings together. Okay, so, and yes, there are also related papers on traditional media and polarization, propagation of political ideas, social image. Okay, so let me switch to the data that we are going to use and idea for identification. So, in Russia, I should start from the fact that Russia is one of 5 countries in the world in which Facebook is not dominant social media. At least it was not like at the time when we studied. And they have their own social media called Kontakte or VK, and it was created as a clone of Facebook. And as Facebook was created by Mark Zuckerberg, VK was created by Pavel Durov, who was at that time an undergraduate student of St. Petersburg State University. So initially, the access to VK was only by invitation through a student forum. But later, it was open to the general public. So not surprisingly, the first users of VK were students from St. Petersburg State University. And St. Petersburg State University is one of the largest universities in Russia. It brings students from more than 2/3 of different Russian cities. And many of students, they never returned back to their home cities, but they kept the networks of friends and families who became the early adopters. So this is just for illustration. This is one of these xenophobic communities. One of the things that they do here, they are trying to sell Adolf Hitler's book. So they say that we are the Slavic Union. Okay, so now because the first users of VK were students at St. Petersburg State University, we argue that this idiosyncratic variation in the distribution of the early users, it could have very long-term effect, long-lasting effect. And how we do it, we essentially, for identification, we use the cities of origins of students in St. Petersburg State University who studied at the same years as VK founder. And we control for the cities of origins of students from the same city studying in the same university several years before and several years after. Okay, so this is just for the illustration. This is how our first stage looks like. So here the dependent variable is VK penetration at the years in 2011. And here you can see the coefficients from the regression are like with the number of students, one cohort older than the founder of VK, the same cohort, and one cohort younger. And what you can see here is that the same cohort is very relevant for the penetration of social media, but older or younger cohort were not particularly relevant. Okay, so and this is our first stage. And like this is essentially illustration, like the table version of the picture that you've just seen. And here you can see again that like after controlling for a bunch of socioeconomic controls for the level of pre-existing nationalism in a city and so on, we can still see that the number of students in the same cohort is relevant for subsequent penetration of the network, while older or younger cohort were not particularly relevant. Okay, so now what we do next, what we do with the source of variation. So first of all, we like study the relationship between social media and xenophobia. And we do it by conducting a list experiment. So we are trying to answer the question whether social media can persuade people to become more xenophobic and whether social media can reduce stigma of expressing xenophobia. So we do survey experiment and then we do the analysis at the city level. Like we collapse it, we do essentially 125 list experiments in different Russian cities. And we use like Durov's classmates as an instrument. So what we do in particular, we take a direct question that was asked by that was invented by sociologists. We took it from the survey of Foundation of Public Opinion. And this question says, do you feel annoyance or dislike towards some ethnicities? Note that we do not specify ethnicities here because in different places in Russia, they hate different ethnicities. Some of them still don't like Jews. Some of them don't like people from Central Asia. Some of them don't like people from Caucasus. So Russia is a large country, so they have a lot of different people to dislike. So we didn't want to be specific about this. So, and then...
Can I just ask a quick question and clarification on that? So by 2018, if you're asking about different ethnicities, how do Russians at this point think about Ukrainians?
That's an interesting question. But yeah, I don't know the answer, whether they like, they feel like, okay, from my own understanding, it's unlikely that Russians like hate Ukrainians in the same way as they hate people like from, I don't know, Caucasus, like, or from Central Asia, like those who hate, of course. but I don't have a good data to answer this question. So our heat crime data, I will give you some like the distribution, and you will see that most of this is toward people from like ethnicities who are like not so close to Russians as Ukrainians or Belarusians.
Okay, oh, so you did ask a follow-up question to get at what ethnicity, what ethnic groups people were talking about.
No, no.
Oh, you did not.
Maybe we had to.
The only thing I was curious about is in 2018, if you're picking up something around the conflict around Crimea, you know, with this question, which would kind of be something different from xenophobia, but probably and that's why I was just curious. I just had no idea if Russians would think of Ukrainians as even a different, you know, as being of a different ethnicity, if that term would encompass very Slavs who are, you know, similar history and things like that.
Yeah, no, that's great idea. We did not have this thought back in 2018, so I'm afraid we lost the momentum. But yeah, if we do it next time, we'll ask. Like, I'm interested. Like, now that you asked, I think it's a good question. Okay, so just for those of you who like maybe not as familiar with list experiment, essentially what we do, we ask people not about like whether you agree with this particular statement about annoyance or dislike towards some ethnicity, but you ask people for the number of statements that you agree with. For example, I'm worried about increase in prices. I think that pensions should be increased and so on. Then the control group only gets non-sensitive statements. The treatment group gets the same non-sensitive statements as control group, plus the statement of interest, which is like this question: do you feel annoyance or dislike towards some ethnicities? So, like having the numbers of answers to this question for treatment and control group, we construct a city-level measure of xenophobia, which is just the difference between treatment and control group for answering this question. But we also construct a city-level measure of stigma by comparing this elicited hostility, the difference between treatment and control group, and so-called self-reported hostility, which is because like for people in control group, we, after the list experiment, we ask them a direct question. So we know what they say directly to questions like this when they know that they might have some stigma of expression. Okay, so this is some results. So here the dependent variable is like elicited hostility, is the difference between treatment and control group, which could be interpreted as percentage of people in a city who agrees with sensitive question, which is the number of people who are secretly or openly xenophobic. And what we find is that social media penetration actually led to higher levels of elicited hostility. And this effect was especially strong for younger people, which is probably not surprising because, first of all, younger people are more likely to be users of social media, and younger people are also more likely to conduct a hate crime. So now, next, we are trying to understand whether there was any negative effect of VK penetration on stigma of expressing this xenophobia. And what we see here, we see there is no evidence of reduction of stigma. We see evidence of the opposite, of increase in stigma. But like this increase is especially relevant for people with high levels of education. So that suggests that if I come with a high level of education to social media, then probably I don't get the signal from social media that expressing xenophobia is now acceptable. If anything, I get the opposite signal. And that's what this table is telling us. So, so all in all, these two tables suggest that we see some evidence of persuasion of social media on xenophobia, but we see no evidence of reduction of stigma as a result of social media exposure. Okay, so here there is one caveat, which is what we measure here is stigma of public expression of xenophobia. We don't, so that's stigma vis-a-vis interviewers rather than like the friends, online friends or like offline friends of these people. So those we cannot measure with this method. Now as like our results suggest that social media led to increase in xenophobia, we ask like more important question, whether this increase in xenophobia actually translates to some tangible outcomes like hate crime. So, and to answer this question, we collected data on hate crime from NGO SOVA, which aims to collect all the data on like ethnically motivated crimes, ethnically and non-ethnic. They also have some LGBT hate crimes for the years of 2004 to 2015. And in their data, the hate crimes are reported by either police or traditional media. And it also helps that in Russian law, there is a special category of crime, which is crime committed by the motives of ethnic hate. And
Masha,
yep.
For 1 second, we have a question from Naila Asimovich, who's a PhD student in the politics department.
Yes, yep. Hi. Just one question. So in terms of this term of ethnic hostility and xenophobia, do you happen to have additional measures of this outcome? Because I wonder if what we're seeing here is also a little bit of an informational channel, as in social media providing information about other ethnicities, making me more aware of the shortcomings of whatever ethnic group says. And the question is phrased, do you feel annoyances against some ethnicity? And I can imagine someone not being ethnically hostile, but still responding, do they have an annoyance? Maybe because even against their own group, I think I would probably respond to this question positively while not holding an ethnically hostile attitude. So I wonder, how are you thinking about operationalizing xenophobia, and if maybe there are additional measures that can be used together?
Okay, no, so I think that there are several questions in your question. And I think that so first of all, what about other measures of xenophobia? So as I don't have it in our presentation, but we tried to ask direct questions on this annoyance or dislike towards some ethnicities. And we looked at the 2011 survey, but as in 2018, we didn't get anything significant in 2018, both in 2018 and in 2011. And that could be due to the case that people, some people are not willing to express it openly. That's why we are seeing significant effect for one and not for another. Thus, we cannot use other surveys because other surveys don't measure it in the right way. what we see is, for example, what is relevant for hate crime part is that if we take a measure of pre-existing nationalism, like voting for nationalistic party, then we see this like strong correlation between our measure of xenophobia and this voting. So, but I think that what you also have like mentioned during your question is this information channel, this like contact hypothesis, whether you get you start to like or dislike other ethnicities after actually seeing them, like after contacting them in some way. And I think that it's still an open question in social science. There are still a lot of papers which are trying to investigate this. But from this literature, what I find it fascinating is that in many places, people who, for example, who expressed most dislike of other ethnicities are like people who don't get in contact with them. Like, for example, if you look at Brexit vote in UK, then like people who voted most for Brexit and say that they hate more foreigners the most are people with the least number of foreigners, people who hardly ever see foreigners. So, but I stop here because I need to go. So we ask whether social media can affect hate crime. And here we should also note that the literature so far suggests that like even if like whether particular groups of population can respond to like some events, to like do some like something violent or extreme right voting, that could depend on initial predispositions. For example, in like Voigtländer and Vogt paper, in our Nazi Germany paper, in recent paper by Davide Cantoni and co-authors, in all of this, we see that initial predispositions matter for the for hate crime and for extreme right voting. So what we do, we not only look at average effect of hate crime, but we also look at whether this depends on predispositions. So, and here, as I mentioned, we take data on hate crime from NGO SOVA, and like as our measure of pre-social media pre-existing nationalism, we use vote shares of the party called Rodina or Motherland in 2003 parliamentary election. And it did not participate in earlier or later elections. And it happened precisely just before the creation of Wiki. So that's convenient. So I'll have a slide on the relevance of this party. But just to give you some information on the hate crimes. So here, this is, I think, Josh, what you've been interested in. So which kind of ethnicities, so here, the data is over by 2015. So there could be.
Yeah, no, I wasn't expecting hate crimes against Ukrainians. I was just wondering if people could be, going back to Nayla's question, annoyances at other ethnicities. I was just actually just legitimately curious whether Russians today considered Ukrainians in that category of other ethnicities. I do have one question. Why did you use Rodina instead of LDPR? I would think of Zhirinovsky as having more of that kind of nationalist legacy.
Let me actually answer your question here. So we thought of using like different parties, but then it turns out like that there are two things. So first of all, if we look at like LDPR, it has like many different things. So it's not like, it was not like its only thing, you know, like it's also, it's a populist party. So it attracted also people who wanted some other crazy things which were completely unrelated to nationalism. So, and actually my impression, maybe like not sure, so that their nationalism was declining. In fact, in this particular election, in this manifesto project, you can see that there was nothing on negative on multiculturalism. If anything, that said something positive about this. While the Motherland Party, it's the only party that was clearly negative on this dimension, that was clearly promoting this Russia for Russians and things like that. So, and you can see that also this nationalistic party support is very well correlated with the number of hate crimes and not related significantly, at least, to the number of non-ethnic hate crimes. So that's another like justification for using this party. So let me go back. Yeah, so I've been checking here. So most of our hate crime victims are victims of ethnic hate crime, but we also have some of non-ethnic hate crime. Okay, so, and if we look at the number of perpetrators, for non-ethnic hate crime, the median number of perpetrators is 1. But for ethnic hate crime, the median number of perpetrators is 2. And like actually many of them are conducted in groups. So like we are going to, in the regression, to separate the results by the number of perpetrators. And that will also help us to look at the mechanism. Okay, so this is, I just showed the slide to Josh. So just to say that Rodina seems to be the only party which just before the creation of VK, it was openly like nationalistic in contrast to other parties, and its vote share was also well correlated with the number of hate crimes. Okay, so if we look at the OLS, we see that there is effect of social media penetration on hate crime, both conducted by single perpetrators, no, mostly conducted by single perpetrators, and on average in total. But like if we start looking at the interaction of social media penetration with nationalistic party support, with pre-existing nationalism, we see that all of these effects become much, much stronger. So from 9 coefficient in this table, you can see that like 6 of them are like positive and significant. At the same time, what you see here is that there is like, this is just OLS. So there are all sorts of reasons why social media penetration could be biased, like could be related to hate crime, like there could be some unobservable determinants of the two. So that's why we need to use some source of variation. That's why we had to introduce this classmates instrument. So once we introduce a classmates instrument, so we like see that on average, at least in Russia, we don't see any significant effect of social media on hate crime. Actually, if you look at these 9 coefficients, then 4, like actually 5 out of 9 even become negative rather than positive. That suggests that, like, at least on average, social media cannot take average person, and like, even though social media can take average person and make this person more xenophobic, it cannot take an average person and make this person more likely to commit a hate crime. And that's quite logical, I think. So, but if we start looking at the interactions, like as I announced, but then we see that there is significant interaction of pre-existing nationalism and social media penetration. So here there is one caveat, which is like the Kleiberberg-Papp statistic actually goes down. Even though we are using this weak instrument robust confidence sets, still, like, so like our results are supposed to be robust whether our instruments are weak or not. Nevertheless, because like we have to use these methods, because like with standard methods, according to standard metrics, our instruments are weak. So like, in fact, what we are doing here, we are reporting weak instrument robust confidence sets throughout the paper, and they're supposed to be like independent on whether our instruments are indeed weak or not. So this is just a technical thing. Okay, so what you can see from this table is that we see the effect of social media on hate crime for all types of victims, for victims of ethnic hate crime and for victims of non-ethnic hate crime. But what we also see is that this effect is relevant both for hate crimes conducted by single perpetrator and for hate crimes conducted by multiple perpetrators. And if anything, this hate crime conducted by the coefficient for hate crime conducted by multiple perpetrators is significantly larger as compared with hate crime conducted by single perpetrator. So like that points toward coordination being one of the important channels that we observe here. Okay, so just to give you some interpretation of the numbers. So here, the numbers that I showed you suggest that the effect of 10% increase in social media penetration led to no increase in the number of hate crimes in cities with minimum support of nationalistic party, but to approximately 25% more victims and more crimes in places with maximum level of support of nationalistic party. So, and as I said, that we see a larger increase in crimes conducted by multiple perpetrators. We also do one additional sanity check to look at the impact of social media on hate crime in places which are larger on average. And here the idea is that, like, in smaller places, the probability that some hate crime goes unnoticed by some local information source, for example, local newspapers, is larger as compared with larger cities. So, like, what we are doing with this analysis, we are trying to understand whether, like, the results are consistent with some selection in reporting. But we find stronger rather than weaker results for larger cities. And that's exactly the opposite to what we have to observe, like, based on selection in reporting hypothesis. So we argue that selection is not likely to explain our results. Okay, so far we find that social media increased our inferred hostility to other ethnicities, like for example, which suggest persuasion channel. Social media at the same time increase stigma rather than decrease stigma of public expression of xenophobia. And also we see effect higher in places with pre-existing high level of nationalism, and some evidence for coordination channel. So now, like before the end of my presentation, let me give you some hints of the model that we wrote down in order to explain everything that we find. So we need a model that would explain first that penetration of social media can lead to more hate crime, but only in places with higher levels of pre-existing nationalism. And this model should also explain that we see that social media makes people more hostile towards minorities. But at the same time, openly expressing xenophobia does not become more socially acceptable. So to deal with this, we came up with what Georgi says, a super simple model. And that's indeed a simple model. Like we have here the opinion formation process in which my opinion today is a function of my opinion yesterday and a function of the position of other individuals. And part of these other individuals are people who are exactly like me, and the other part of these individuals are just random people. So, and our assumption about social media is that this fraction of people who are exactly like me proxies for social media penetration. Here we implicitly assume that with social media, people are more likely to find like-minded people online. And we even have another project in which we find some evidence for this, that indeed with the what at least Armenians do in social media, they are more likely to make friendship with other Armenians online, especially if they don't have enough Armenians in their home city. Okay, so here we assume that social media makes probability that I meet like-minded people higher. So now, because we have this probabilistic process, as any probabilistic process of this sort, each converges as t approaches infinity, each converges to a normal distribution. But here mu is the mean of the distribution, but the variance actually is a function of several things. One of them is just the variance of initial idiosyncratic shock. So it's the same for everybody. But also it depends on W, which is the weight that I put on my own opinion, and tau, which is the penetration of social media. And what this formula tells us is that higher tau just slows down the natural convergence of this process. And So as a result, stochastic shocks, they need some time to accumulate. In other words, like once we assume that social media increases probability of meeting like-minded people, we immediately get that social media can increase polarization. Okay. And here is, I confused the picture, but I can explain you with this picture. So here you can see that like in our model, all people are arranged on tolerance to xenophobia axis. And now what social media does, social media changes the shape of the distribution from the purple one to the green one. And with the green distribution, we see that like with social media, the distribution now has fatter tails. And that generates the heterogeneity results that we obtained, which is in places with low pre-existing levels of nationalism, we have observed some increase in hate crimes conducted, but it's not large, and it's like it could be insignificant as it is in our case. But in places with high pre-existing levels of nationalism, as at the bottom part of this picture, we observe that like the fat tails, they become much fatter. So in the sense that we see significant increase in the number of people who commit hate crimes as a result of social media penetration. Okay, so, and while if we like, thankfully hate crimes are rare, so what our results suggest is that higher pre-existing nationalism mu makes mu plus sigma closer to the threshold, making the effect of social media stronger. While if we look at the annoyance or dislike of other ethnicities, it's quite common. So overall, like there is like first positive effect and then negative effect, which could in principle cancel out. So we get the prediction that the level of the interaction of social media and pre-existing nationalism on dislike for other ethnicities is ambiguous. Okay, so like I'm afraid that you didn't ask a lot of questions during the talk, so like you need to ask questions now because I'm already at the conclusion. So what I think that our paper shows is that like first of all, social media can lead to increase in both xenophobia and hate crimes. And the effect for hate crimes is like only important in places with high pre-existing level of nationalism, which suggests that social media cannot, like even though social media can make previously tolerant people to become less tolerant or more intolerant, but they cannot make previously intolerant people to become so intolerant that they run to commit hate crimes. We also find some evidence that social media reduced stigma, like increased stigma of expressing xenophobia in order to, and we can rule out the story, at least in our setting, that this like expression in xenophobia is due to reduced stigma. We just don't see negative effect. We see positive and significant effect for stigma. And finally, we find that our results are consistent with social media having a positive effect on polarization, but not making society more xenophobic on average. Yeah, so I stop here. And if there are some other questions, I'll be, of course, happy to answer them.
We have a first question from Anton.
Anton, we can't hear you.
Hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, Maria, thank you so much for the presentation. Now, I have one question and one suggestion. So the suggestion, I'm thinking about the additional robustness checks for the instrument that you're using. And I really like the data on voting for the motherland. So I'm thinking that in addition to what you do now, you could also show us that your instrument, the Dur of France, this instrument does not predict the voting in motherland in 2003, as I understand from the logic of the instrument. But what we also could expect that it should predict the results of motherland when they were reunited in or at least it's a possibility that you could expect it when they were reunited in 2016. So the motherland was reunited in 2016, and also in 2011 they had a successor party, Patriots of Russia. They got only 1%, but nevertheless you could try to look if your instrument actually predicts the variation in the vote share for the Patriots of Russia. And my question is about the survey. Could you tell us a little bit more about these 125 cities, how they were chosen? Is it online survey or not? Because I was thinking that if it is online survey, there could be some selection problems with the fact that in the smaller cities, it's like a group of much more progressive, educated people who choose to participate in that kind of surveys. Thank you for the great presentation.
Okay, so like for the question about other parties, so we know that Rodina, it's like most politicians from Rodina, they just joined United Russia. So, and we did not look at like the vote shares of this like other parties because we wanted for our purpose to have pre-existing levels of nationalism. But you are right that we should try to look at the these other parties as potentially other outcomes. So they was even much smaller than Rodina, but like they exist nevertheless. So we can, in principle, see the result. So for your question about the survey, I just realized that I forgot to include we had a wonderful map that my co-author composed with the locations of the survey, and which I can't easily find on my computer. So like I really apologize. So like I don't know what happened and how it disappeared from my presentation. But yeah, so no, okay. But like this, the survey was conducted online. The survey was conducted by marketing firms, which aims to which sells its product as a representative sample of Russian internet users. So obviously, like on average, Russian internet users, they live in the larger cities. But like other than size, we don't see like much difference like, in terms of the participants. But after all, even if these cities were not exactly chosen at random, still our main comparison is by making an experiment within each of these cities. So indeed, we see that in our survey, 2/3 of people have higher education, and 1/3 had doesn't have higher education, which is slightly which is less as compared with just for the Russian population. But nevertheless, it's not close to zero. It's not that only highly educated people were answering our survey. No, it's not the case. So, and I apologize for the map. I should have it ready and I don't. Sorry.
Hi, Maria, I have a question. So I was away from my computer for like 5 minutes. So if you already addressed this, I apologize. But I was curious about what kind of content in social media do you think it's driving these results? If it's because it exposes people to potentially xenophobic views from elites, political elites, like politicians, or do you think it just exposes people to just, content or opinions of everyday citizens?
Okay, no, that's a fantastic question. So one of the things is that the VK is like Facebook. They have some open content and some of the content is not open. So and they have some xenophobic communities, but most of the most odious ones, they were closed by the regulator. This regulator also closes some communities, some positional communities. So, but as a byproduct of their existing, their official goal of existence is to fight xenophobia and nationalism, and they do something of this. They do fight xenophobia and nationalism. So some of this content existed at some form, but we no longer have access to this. But with the content that we have, our understanding is that it's mostly about just other people rather than politicians. Partly because the dominant party in Russia is United Russia. And United Russia can be criticized on infinite number of fronts, but xenophobia is not one of them. So they if they ever touch this question, they try to say that no, we need to to avoid these ethnic tensions and stuff like that. So that's why I think but indeed we collected when we VK was still allowing to collect data online, we collected just the entire walls of random 1,000 users for this 625 cities from each city, and we can indeed try to look at it. When we've never done anything super interesting with this data. So, and that's a question that we can probably answer with this data.
Great, thank you.
We have 2 more questions in the queue from Natalia and then from Tim.
Hi, Maria. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I have this question. I was maybe interested in looking one additional potential outcome of interest. So we know that the Russian marchers, they became more popular and they penetrated different cities. And as you've said, you have a sample of 125 cities, and maybe that would be another interesting outcome of interest to look at, because, well, it kind of is more about coordination on the one hand. On the other, it does not require, to commit a crime. and also it is more public, so people might.
So can you say again which outcome did you want?
Participation of people in Russian marches,
Oh,
Ruski
yeah.
March.
Yeah.
So it's like they don't have to commit a crime, and it's not like a private opinion that people might hold. It's something that is observable.
Mm-hmm.
So it might tackle both the stigma question and the not just the willingness to commit a crime, but make something public gesture, saying that, yeah, I don't like other kinds of people. So, but thank you for this wonderful presentation. It was just a suggestion that you can use.
Oh, thanks a lot. So we did not look at this Russian marches indeed. We don't know how much variation there is in terms of the cities, but we should definitely take a look. Yeah. So I think it's a great idea, and we should at least try to like investigate this. Yeah. So.
Masha, I have a question. It's Tim.
Yeah.
First of all, hello, good to see you, and terrific presentation. I really like the direction you're going in. I had a question that's somewhat related to what Natalia just asked about, regional variation and how you can exploit it. But I'm especially interested in the data from SOVA.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people use these data. Can you talk a little bit about the quality of it, and if there might be any bias in reporting, given that it's coming from very heterogeneous regions? And also there's an interesting over time component in the data, right? So you've got, real variation from the early period in terms of level of openness from the later period. And I'm wondering if you've been able to exploit that in any way.
Yeah, so there are two questions here, right? The one is about SOVA, the quality of data by SOVA, and another is about the periods, the time periods. So like it's easier to answer the second one. So we tried to look at this period by period, and we find that like if any, like the effect was concentrated on the initial periods, like we split the sample into 2007, 2009, 2010, 2012, and 2013, 2015. And we find that the effect was mostly concentrated in the first two periods. So, and that again speaks against this, the selection of reporting concern, because the selection of reporting would suggest that as time goes by, social media becomes like more proliferate, and you get more like potentially some hate crimes are more likely to get reported on social media. So like as for for SOVA, I don't think that they do their best. So we even talked to these people. They try to collect all available evidence. So arguably, it's not like all the evidence that exists, because they don't have the original data by FSB, by police. So, and that's not nice. But we can't really double check, because we don't have data for the underlying distribution. We cannot check this. But what we can, we have a couple of arguments against this selective reporting. One is that I just mentioned, that the effect is concentrated on earlier period. The second one, you remember I showed you the table that in larger cities we see more of the effect, while selective reporting is more likely to be in smaller cities. And finally, this heterogeneity with the pre-existing nationalism is difficult to explain with just selective reporting. So
thanks a lot.
I think that this is all that I can tell you.
No, thanks a lot. I don't want to be too critical, given it's a heroic effort that Sava is doing. So I do want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks for a question. Great seeing you.
So I have one question, if I can abuse my power to interject here, about the implications of the model, right? So I guess I don't know exactly who the factions sort of that are working against hate crime in Russia are, but presumably there's somebody. To what do you think that your model gives sort of insights into who they should target their efforts at? Right, so should they be targeting it instead of on a geographic basis or on a sort of social media users basis to certain users in certain places, or is that a bad plan?
I think, no, that's a very good question. So I think that okay, so part of it is that we don't really understand which kind of content affects, like whether they should like target some opinion leaders or like this the most central people in the network. But like what our results and our models suggest, both our results and our models suggest is that places at risk are places with high pre-existing levels of nationalism, which have higher levels of hate crime to begin with. They have higher levels of baseline hate crime, but they are also at the risk of having it even higher in the presence of social media. So I would say that like whatever we know from this other literature suggests that targeting central peoples in this like social networks would help from like social media point of view, but of course you should target more you should target the places, like you should fight hate crime in places with high pre-existing level of nationalism, but that's very straightforward. You don't need the model in order to come to this conclusion.
Great, thanks. I think Josh has some more questions, and feel free anyone to raise your hand or message us if you also have questions.
Yeah, is there anyone else who wants to ask a question first? Okay, I had a couple of just small questions, but thank you so much for a great presentation. Super interesting. It's been fun to watch this research agenda develop, and it's awesome to see sort of more creative uses that you're able to put the Durov instrument to. I had two questions. One was on slide 29. It seemed like you had social media usage was finding an increase for the non-ethnic hate crimes. And I wonder what that means for your key findings. If this is supposed to be working through this issue about ethnic hate crimes, why are you at all worried? That slide. Are you at all worried that you're getting these statistically significant effects in column 7 and 9, that you might be picking up something besides the mechanism that you think you're picking up here?
No, like one of the mechanism is the mechanism on like of coordination, and that's like, and as you can see that like most like we don't see effect on like non-ethnic hate crime conducted by multiple by single perpetrators, only by multiple perpetrators. But more generally, we think that like it could be applicable to other type of like hate, like LGBT. We just don't have a lot of Initially, we thought that we maybe will investigate also crimes against LGBT. We don't have a lot of them in our sample. That's the reason we just.
Okay, so the idea here is that social media is just, you know, so that might extend beyond hate crimes even, right? Like it's just a coordinating mechanism, the same way we think about it for protest participation or something like that. Okay.
It's coordinating mechanism, but it's can generate hate, increase in like hostility towards other groups. And this like other groups should not be different necessarily in ethnicity. It could be like groups which are different in some other way.
Okay, and then the second question I had was about the model on slide 36, which you were describing as saying, you know, that this was fitting this condition that it has a bigger impact. The slide before that,
So
36.
which slide is 36?
36.
Yeah, so.
What? Yeah, with the figures on it.
Oh, the one.
Yeah. So you were describing this as saying, okay, so this is consistent with the idea that you get more of a rise in hate crimes in these areas with high pre-existing nationalism. And so yeah, no, obviously the area between the curves is larger in the lower graph than it is in the higher graph. But the proportion increase in the crimes looks like, now maybe this is just an abstraction, but obviously it looks like it's bigger. The proportionate increase is actually bigger in the low pre-existing nationalism areas. And so I wonder what that means for the comparative statics of this, right? Like, are you actually expecting then that you would see, what would you expect? What would be the, you know, would you expect to see a positive effect still in that case for the interaction with pre-existing nationalism if what we're roughly getting is a doubling in the high pre-existing nationalism, but we're getting a quadrupling or a quintupling or something even more than that to a lower level, to a lower top level? Does that have an implication for what you would expect to see and how this matches with the results you found?
No, I think that it should depend like on specific parameters, but like in terms of the model, but we can also empirically try to look at the proportional the only problem is that we really don't have a lot of hate crime like data before 2006. So we use something that SOVA reports for 2004 to 2006 as placebo estimate, kind of. But they themselves say that, oh, like this data is not complete. While the data after 2007 is complete in their point of view, in their view. So like that's why we use the data from 2007 to 2015. So so I'm not sure what we can do empirically here. Oh, I mean, we can try to control. We even have some results, which again, I don't have in the presentation, which is if we treat every period as kind of separate observation, we can create a panel data. And what you will see is that like with this interpretation, and then we can control for fixed effects of places. And then like we can still see that the social media penetration is going to have a positive effect in places with high pre-existing levels of nationalism. But I mean, I don't think it can answer your question.
Yeah, it was more about the link between the data. I mean, because it seems like the model here is predicting the way you describe the model, the flattening and then making the tails get bigger. It seems like that's actually predicting a larger proportionate increase in the low areas than it is in the high areas, even if it's predicting a larger absolute increase in the high areas than the low areas. So that might be something you can.
Oh, yeah, thanks. We'll look at it theoretically. Theoretically, we can definitely look at it. And yeah, so, and let's see, maybe we can do something with this empirically. I have to think more about it. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Maria, for a great presentation. Thanks all for joining and for your questions. And we will look forward to seeing many of you again next semester.